I have kept the Queen's medicines for 9 years, and in all that time I never once saw a king's guard move before he was told to. Until the afternoon Sergeant Emric Thorne broke every rule of his order and struck the cup out of Queen Saralind's hand a heartbeat before it touched her lips. You should understand that I was not supposed to be watching him at all. My name is Wren Callowe, and I am the assistant apothecary of the royal household, which is a grand way of saying that I count pills and steep tisanes and stand at the back of great occasions in case someone faints in the heat. On that afternoon, I was doing exactly what I was born to do, which is watch a room from its edges and notice nothing important, and I had my eyes on the Queen only because it was my duty to have them there. She was standing on the Whitethorn Terrace in the gold light of a late spring day, at the very center of 400 guests, raising the crystal cup of the realm to her mouth to seal the investiture of a new order of the Whitethorn, the highest civil honor the Kingdom of Eldermoor can bestow. Her hand was steady, her lips were parting, and 2 paces behind her right shoulder, where a guardsman is meant to be a red-end black statue that happens to breathe, Sergeant Thorne came out of his stillness like a wave breaking and knocked the cup clean out of her grasp. It struck the flagstones and shattered. I will never forget the sound. Crystal does not simply break, it screams, one bright shredding note, and then a rain of glass across the pale stone, and wine the deep red of old garnets spraying up the front of the Queen's ivory gown and across the shoes of the Lord Chamberlain, and into the roses that line the terrace. The Founder's Cup of Eldermoor, 400 years old, cut from a single block of mountain crystal by hands long dead, lay in 100 glittering pieces at the feet of its Queen. And then the world stopped. I have tried many times since to describe the silence that came after, and I have never found the words for it, because it was not the absence of sound. It was a presence. 400 people drew one breath and held it, and the little orchestra by the fountain scraped into a ragged stop, and somewhere a woman made a small broken sound that was not quite a scream, and above all of it the birds in the terrace limes went on singing as though nothing at all had happened, which somehow made it worse. Every face on that terrace had turned to Sergeant Thorne, to the guard who had just assaulted the Queen of Eldermoor at the most sacred moment of a state ceremony, in full view of the assembled nobility, the foreign envoys, and the cameras of the royal broadcast that carried the whole thing live into 10 million homes. I knew Emric Thorne a little, the way you know a man you have passed 1,000 times without speaking. He was 50 years old and had worn the red tunic for 30 of them, and he was a legend in the household precisely because nothing moved him. There was a story, I never knew if it was true, that a wasp had once walked across his open eye during the summer parade, and he had not so much as blinked. He was the man they put behind the Queen when it mattered most, because he was the most disciplined man in the whole of the King's Guard. And now that same man stood over a shattered cup with his gloved hand still open from the blow, his chest heaving, and his eyes were the thing I could not look away from. His eyes were fixed on the wine soaking into the stone, as though it were a live thing that might yet rise up and strike. The Lord Chamberlain found his voice first. "Seize him," he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of the word. "Seize that man." 2 guardsmen from the terrace steps started forward, their boots loud on the stone, and I saw Sergeant Thorne's captain, a hard, narrow man named Haveth whom I had never liked, already moving up the terrace with his hand going to Thorne's shoulder, and I understood, with the cold clarity you get in the worst moments, that this man's life was about to end in front of me. Not his body, his life, everything he was. A guardsman does not touch the sovereign. There is no lesser version of that sin. He would be stripped and broken and forgotten, and it would happen within the hour, and there was nothing anyone on that terrace could do to stop it. Except one person. Queen Saralind had not moved. That was the thing that saved him in the end, and it is the thing I remember most clearly of the whole terrible afternoon, not the crystal, not the wine, not the shouting. The Queen did not flinch. She did not clutch her hand to her chest or cry out or stumble back the way a startled person does when a thing is struck from their grasp. She stood exactly where she had been standing, her ringed hand still half lifted in the empty air where the cup had been, and she turned her head slowly and looked at the man who had struck it away. I had served that woman for 9 years, and I had learned to read the small weather of her face, and I watched her do, in the space of 2 seconds, a thing that the 400 people around her would need an hour to do. I watched her look into Emric Thorne's face, past the horror of what he had done, past the shattered cup, past the certain ruin of her whole gleaming afternoon, and I watched her decide that a man who had never in 30 years moved without an order had not chosen this moment to go mad. "Hold," she said. She did not raise her voice. I have never once heard her raise her voice, but that single word traveled the length of the terrace like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath, and Captain Haveth's hand froze a hand's breadth from Sergeant Thorne's collar, and the 2 guardsmen on the steps stopped mid-stride, and 400 people who had been one breath from a roar held that breath a little longer. "No one touches my guardsman," the Queen said, "until I have heard him." And then to Thorne, lower, in a voice I do not think carried past the 3 of us nearest her, "Sergeant, you have stood at my back for 11 years, and in 11 years you have never turned your head without my leave. So you will look at me now, in front of all these people before I let them take you, and you will tell me why you struck the cup from my hand." I saw the great muscles of his jaw work. I saw him drag his eyes up from the wine to her face, and when he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel and perfectly steady. "Because it was poison, Majesty," he said. "And I can prove it before you finish drawing breath to doubt me." I heard the words go out across the terrace, and I heard 400 people receive them. A man near me laughed once, a short, ugly bark, the laugh of someone who needs a thing not to be true. A woman in blue swayed and was caught by her husband. The foreign envoys along the balustrade went very still in the particular way of people who have just realized they are witnessing something that will be in every dispatch by nightfall. And the Queen held Emric Thorne's eyes, and I watched the question form behind her own, the only question that mattered on that whole terrace, the one that would keep me awake for a week. Not is he telling the truth, but how, in the name of everything holy, could he possibly know? That is the part that stunned the court. Not that the cup was poisoned, though God knows the poison was only the beginning of it, and the truth behind it would not finish unfolding for 3 more days. It was how he knew. It was the reason he had moved. And to make you understand the reason, I have to carry you back from that ringing terrace, back past the shattered crystal and the held breath, to a thing that had begun 9 days earlier, in the cold stone dispensary where I keep the Queen's medicines, with a question about a broken cup that no one but Emric Thorne had thought to ask. But first let me finish the moment, because it deserves finishing. The Queen turned from Thorne at last. She looked down at the wreckage of the cup, at the wine bleeding into the seams of the flagstones, at the ruin of 400 years of ceremony, and her gray eyes traveled up the terrace and came to rest on the man who had carried that cup to her side. He was the master of the ceremony himself, the household's herald and keeper of the regalia, a tall silver-haired man named Lord Corwin Ashby, who had presided over every great occasion of her reign with a dignity so polished it seemed carved. It had been his gloved hands that lifted the founder's cup from its velvet case and filled it and set it in the Queen's grasp not 1 minute before, as they had at every investiture for 20 years. Lord Ashby was not looking at the Queen. He was not looking at the shattered cup. He was looking at the low gate at the end of the terrace, the one that led down through the yew walk to the river stair, and his face had gone the color of ash, and one of his hands had risen to the golden chain of office at his throat and closed around it as though it were choking him. "Close the terrace," the Queen said. "No one leaves." And the guardsmen at every gate stepped together and stood, and the Whitethorn Terrace, that had been a garden of honor 1 minute before, became a room with no door. I saw Lord Ashby understand it. I saw the fine polished dignity slide off his face all at once, the way frost slides off a window when the sun finds it, and beneath it was something I had never seen on a great man before and have never forgotten since, not guilt, exactly, but a terrible drowning grief, the face of a man watching the whole floor of his life give way beneath his feet. He did not run. There was nowhere to run. He only stood there with his hand at his throat while the wine spread and the birds sang, and I remember thinking, with the strange sideways clarity of shock, he is not surprised. Whatever else is true, that man is not surprised that the cup was poisoned. Neither, it turned out, was Emric Thorne, but Thorne had known for a different reason. And to understand both of them, the herald's grief and the guardsman's certainty, you have to go back with me now to the dispensary, 9 days before, and to the morning a 50-year-old guardsman came to my door with a question about a chip in a piece of crystal that no living person was supposed to be able to see. The dispensary of Harrowgate Palace is a long, cold, north-facing room in the old wing, 3 flights below the state apartments, where the light comes in gray and even all day, and the shelves climb to the ceiling with their 1,000 labeled jars. I love it there. It is the one place in the whole palace where nothing is for show. I had been the assistant apothecary for 9 years under old Master Pell, and when Pell's hands began to shake too badly for the fine weighing, the work had drifted, quietly and without any ceremony, to me. I kept the Queen's own physic, her headache draughts, her winter tonic, the sleeping tisane she took perhaps 4 nights a year when the cares of the realm would not let her rest. I knew the inside of that family's health the way Sergeant Thorne knew the outside of their safety, and though we had never spoken of it, I think each of us understood that the other stood a kind of guard. He came to my door on a gray morning 9 days before the investiture, and I knew at once that something was wrong, because Emric Thorne did not visit. In 9 years he had crossed my threshold exactly twice, both times for a burned salve he was too proud to ask the barracks surgeon for. He filled the doorway now in his off-duty greatcoat, his bearskin under his arm, and he stood there a moment as though weighing whether to come in at all. "Mistress Callowe," he said, "you have a good eye, better than mine for small things. I want you to look at something and tell me I am imagining it." He set a thing on my work table, wrapped in a square of gray felt, and unfolded it, and it was a wine cup, not the great founder's cup, but one of the household's everyday ceremonial cups, cut crystal, the sort used at the lesser feasts. I picked it up. It was cold and heavy and flawed with no flaw I could find. "I don't understand," I said. "It's a cup." "Look at the rim," he said, "the near side under the lamp." I brought the lamp close and turned the cup, and after a moment I saw it, or rather I saw where he wanted me to look, because there was nothing there. The rim was smooth crystal, perfect all the way around. "There's nothing," I said. "That is what I need you to be sure of," said Thorne. "Now tell me, if a man wished to poison a cup, not the wine, the cup, and wished it to touch only one person and pass over a taster, how would he do it?" I set the cup down. The cold of the room seemed suddenly to have got into my bones. "Emric," I said, "what is this?" He did not answer that. He was not a man you hurried. He drew out a chair and sat, which he had never once done in my dispensary, and he turned his bearskin slowly in his hands, and he told me a thing that I have thought about every day since. "You know the founder's cup," he said. "The great crystal, the one the Queen drinks from at the high ceremonies, 400 years old. I have stood behind that cup at 11 investitures, Mistress Callowe, and every one of those 11 times I have watched it come out of its case and be filled and be raised and be drunk. And a man who watches a thing 11 times, if he is the kind of man who watches, he learns it. He learns it better than he knows his own hands." He turned the bearskin over. "The founder's cup has a fault in it, a chip. Down near the foot, on the side that faces the drinker's body when the cup is raised. You would never see it from the front. You would never see it at all unless you had stood behind it 11 times and watched the light catch that one place. A little star of white in the crystal, no bigger than a grain of barley. It has been there 400 years. It is the reason I know that cup from every other cup in the world. And, I said, though the cold in me already knew. 3 days ago, said Emric Thorn, the Founder's Cup came out of its case for the herald's inspection, as it does before every great ceremony, so that Lord Ashby may see it is sound. I was on the door. I watched it, the way I watch everything. And Mistress Callowe, he set the bearskin down and looked at me, and there was something in his flat gray soldier's face that I had never seen there, a kind of controlled fear. Worse for being controlled, the chip was gone. The cup that Lord Ashby held up to the light 3 days ago is a perfect cup. Flawless. 400 years old and not a mark on it. And there is only one way a 400-year-old cup grows a flawless twin. I understood him then. My hand had gone to my mouth without my telling it to. Someone made a copy, I said. Someone made a copy, Thorn agreed. A good one. Good enough to fool a herald who glances at it for the ceremony and a court that has never looked at it closely in its life. Cut crystal is cut crystal to most eyes, but not the same cup. Not the 400-year-old one. Somewhere in this palace, Mistress Callowe, the true Founder's Cup has been taken and hidden, and a false one has been set in its place, ready to be filled and raised and drunk from at the investiture 9 days from now. And I have asked myself for 3 nights running why a man would go to such trouble and such danger to swap one cup for another that looks exactly the same. He stood and picked up the everyday cup off my table, the harmless one, and held it to the lamp. The only answer I can find is that the 2 cups are not exactly the same, that the difference is not in what your eye can see, that the difference is in the cup itself, in what has been done to it, to the crystal, to the rim. Which is why I have come to the one person in this palace who knows what can be painted onto a rim, and dried invisible, and wake up again when it meets wine and a warm mouth. I did not answer him at once. I went to the tall window and looked out at the gray courtyard and made myself think, because if I was going to say a terrible thing, I wanted to be sure of it before I said it. And the terrible thing was that he was right, that there was a way. It could be done, I said finally to the window. There are preparations, I will not name them aloud, not even here, that can be dissolved in a spirit of wine and painted thin as a breath onto glass, and dried, and leave no color and no smell. On a plate of food, a taster would find it. A taster eats a morsel of everything. But a cup, I turned around. A taster wets his lips at the cup, Emric. He does not drink from the rim where a lady sets her mouth. If a man painted the poison on one arc of the rim only, the far arc, the arc the drinker turns to her own lips out of long habit, the arc a taster would never think to touch. Then the taster passes it clean, and the cup is set in the queen's hand, and she raises it, and she turns the fair side of the rim to her own mouth, because that is what a person does. We all do it, and she drinks. I felt sick saying it. And a false cup could be prepared so, in a workshop, at leisure, over days and dried, and swapped for the true one. You could not do that to the real cup. It never leaves its case but under the herald's eye and the guards. But a copy you could work on in secret for a month. The dispensary was very quiet. Somewhere above us, a bell was ringing for the changing of a watch. Then we agree, said Thorn. We agree on how it could be done, I said. We do not know that it has been done. Emric, a missing chip. That is what you have. A flaw you alone remember, that you alone can swear was ever there. Do you understand what will happen if you carry that to Captain Haveth, to the Chamberlain? They will thank you and send you to the barracks surgeon to have your eyes tested. There is no false cup in your hands. There is no poison. There is a man who says a 400-year-old cup used to have a scratch that isn't there anymore, and who cannot prove the scratch was ever there at all, because the only record of it is inside his own head. I know it, said Thorn. He said it without any heat. That was the thing about him I came to understand over the days that followed. He was not a stubborn man, not the way stubborn men are, riding a feeling past all sense. He had simply looked at the evidence of his own eyes for 30 years and learned to trust it, and he trusted it now, and no amount of my telling him he could not prove it changed the fact that he had seen what he had seen. I know exactly what will happen. That is why I have not gone to Haveth. That is why I have come to you. He put the harmless cup back down on my felt. I do not need them to believe me, Mistress Callowe. I need to find the true cup before the investiture, or find the false one, or find the man who made the swap, and then I will have a thing I can put in the Queen's hand instead of a story about a scratch. 9 days. I have counted them. I want your eyes and your knowledge and your keys to the parts of this palace a guardsman cannot go. Will you give me them? And here is the thing you must understand about me, so that you understand everything that followed. I said yes before he finished asking. I have gone over it many times since, wondering whether I ought to have hesitated, whether a wiser woman would have gone straight to the Chamberlain and let the great machinery of the palace grind the thing out in its own way. But I had spent 9 years watching Queen Saralind from the edges of rooms, watching her sit up past midnight over a famine relief that half her council thought beneath her, watching her learn the names of the underservants, watching her once, on a bad winter night, carry a cup of my own broth up 3 flights of stairs to a dying old porter with her own hands because she would not have him die among strangers. She was good. It is not a fashionable word, and it is not a grand one, but it is the only true one, and it is rarer on a throne than anyone who has not served near one can know. I would have given Emric Thorn my eyes and my keys, and a great deal more than that to keep her alive one more spring. Yes, I said, God help us both, yes. He nodded once, as though the matter had merely been settled and not just turned my whole safe gray life on its head, and he picked up his bearskin and went to the door. And there he stopped, with his hand on the frame, and said the thing that turned the whole affair from a puzzle into a hunt. There is one thing more you should know, Mistress Callowe, before you say yes and cannot unsay it. He did not turn around. I told you I noticed the chip was gone when the cup came out for the herald's inspection 3 days past. That is true, but I did not tell you the rest. Now he turned, and his flat gray eyes found mine. When the cup came out flawless and I felt the ground move under me, I did the only thing a guardsman may do without breaking his post. I said nothing, and I moved nothing, and I only looked. And I watched the faces in that room to see if any one of them knew what I knew, and there was one. He let it sit a moment. Lord Ashby, our master of the ceremony. When that false cup came out of its case and caught the light, I watched his eyes go to the foot of it, to the very place, Mistress Callowe, on the side that faces the body, where the chip has been for 400 years. He looked for the flaw, and when he did not find it, he was not surprised. He was relieved. I have watched men's faces for 30 years, and I know relief when I see it cross one. Our herald looked at that cup, and he was glad the flaw was gone. Thorn set his bearskin on his head. 9 days, he said. We had best begin. And he was gone into the gray corridor, and I stood alone in my cold dispensary with a harmless cup on a square of felt, and the whole vast weight of the thing settling onto my shoulders. The false cup, the painted rim, the missing chip, and the herald who had been glad to see it gone. That was where Act I of our 9 days ended, if a life could be said to have acts. Not with a bang, with a quiet man in a doorway and the terrible ordinary word yes. We divided the work the way you divide a field you must both plow before dark. Thorn would watch the men, the herald, the cellar, the regalia room, the comings and goings that a guardsman on his rounds could observe without a soul thinking it strange. I would chase the cup itself, where a false founder's cup could be made, and by whom, and how the maker's hand might be found. I began where any physician begins, with what I knew. To copy a 400-year-old crystal is not a thing a common thief can do in a back room. Cut crystal of that quality, that clarity, that weight, that precise old faceting, comes from a handful of masters in the whole kingdom, and the finest of them, the one whose work sat on the Queen's own table, was a woman named Saralind of Eldermoor. I knew the name before I ever went looking, because everyone at court knew it. Saralind of Eldermoor was the royal glasswright and perfumer both, which sounds a strange pairing until you understand that the two crafts are cousins. Both are the art of catching something invisible and making it hold. She blew the glass for the palace, and she distilled the scents the queen wore, and she was celebrated for both. A small, elegant, silver-haired woman of perhaps 60 with pale, clever hands, and a workshop in the old orangery at the foot of the west garden, where the light came through 100 panes, and the whole air smelled of orange flower and hot glass. I had bought tincture bottles from her a dozen times. I had thought her one of the pleasantest people at court. I went to her on the second day with a false errand, a set of small blue bottles for a winter cordial, I said, and might I see the crystal she was cutting for the coming investiture, for it was the talk of the household. And Saralind of showed me her workshop with perfect grace, and I saw at once that if a false founder's cup had been made anywhere in Eldermoor, it had been made here. The tools were here. The skill was here. On a shelf near the window stood 3 cut crystal goblets in various stages of finishing, and any one of them could have been the twin of a founder's cup in the right hands. But it was not the crystal that stopped my breath, it was the smell. You must remember what I am. 9 years of steeping and distilling and weighing had given me a nose that could pick one herb out of a shut cupboard, and as Saralind of walked me past her far bench, under the swags of drying flowers and the racks of little stoppered bottles of scent, I caught, beneath the orange flower, beneath the hot glass tang, a thread of something else. Faint. Almond and something bitter under the almond, something green and wrong. It was there, and then the draught from the door took it away, and I could not have sworn to it in a court of law, but my whole body had gone cold, because I knew that smell. It is the smell of a certain preparation that I keep under 3 locks in the dispensary and account for to the ounce, and that has no business in a perfumer's orangery, none at all. I said nothing. I bought my blue bottles, and I praised her crystal, and I walked out into the west garden on legs that did not feel like mine, and I did not stop walking until I found Whitethorn on his round by the yew walk. "It's Voss," I said, "the glasswright. She has the skill to make the cup, and I would swear on my life she has the poison in her workshop. I smelled it, Imric, under the flowers." But Thorn was already shaking his head slowly, and I saw that he had learned something too, and that it did not fit. "Then tell me why," he said. "That is the wall I keep walking into, Mistress Callowe. I have watched Saralind of for 2 days. I have read her ledgers. The household accounts are open to a sergeant of the guard, and I have read them. That woman is the most honored craftswoman in the kingdom. She has served this throne for 30 years. The queen dines with her twice a year and calls her friend. She has money, she has fame, she has the freedom of the palace. Why would such a woman put poison on a cup? What does she gain that she does not already hold in both hands?" He shook his head again. "I do not doubt your nose. I doubt the story your nose is telling. A poisoner needs a reason, and the reason is the truest part of any crime. Find the reason and you find the hand. And I cannot find one reason on this earth for Saralind of to want Queen Saralind dead." He was right, and I hated that he was right, and we stood in the yew walk in the failing light with the 2 halves of the thing that would not join, the skill and the poison in Saralind of workshop, and no earthly motive to set them working. It was the herald who had the fear on his face. It was the glasswright who had the means in her hands, and nothing connected them but a missing chip in a piece of 400-year-old crystal. "There is a reason," said Thorn at last quietly. "There is always a reason. We have not gone back far enough to find it." He looked out over the west garden, at the orangery glowing warm in the dusk with the woman inside it who could catch the invisible and make it hold. "Tomorrow," he said, "we stop watching what they do. We go and find out who they were." It is a strange thing to dig into the past of people you see every day. You think you know a person at court. You know their office and their manner and the shape of their laugh across a hall. And then you go down into the old records, and you find that the person you know is only the last thin layer of a much longer story, and that the beginning of that story explains the end in a way nothing else ever could. I went to the household archives, which are my right as a keeper of the physic, since the medical rolls are kept there. Thorn could not come, a guardsman in the archives would have been remarked at once, so I went alone, day after day in the 3rd and 4th and 5th days of our 9, and I read until my eyes burned, and what I found came together slowly, the way a picture comes up in a chemist's bath, one gray shape at a time. Saralind of Eldermoor had not always been Saralind of Eldermoor. She had been born Saralind of Marsh, the daughter of a country glassmaker, and she had married young and well, married a rising man of law named Edmund Voss, who had come to court in the old Queen Mother's day and risen to sit upon the king's bench itself, one of the great judges of the realm. For 15 years the Vosses had been a golden couple, the clever craftswoman and the brilliant judge, and then, some 20 years passed before my time, before Thorn's watch at the Queen's back, Edmund Voss had fallen. I read the record 3 times to be sure I had it right. There had been a great scandal over a mine in the northern hills, a mine whose collapse had killed 40 men, and a question of whether the disaster had been known and hidden for profit, and Judge Voss had been the man who sat over the inquiry, and the inquiry had cleared the mine's owners. And 2 years later, new evidence had come to light, that the judge had been paid, that the verdict had been bought, that 40 men had died and their widows been turned away, because Edmund Voss had taken gold to look the other way. He had been stripped of his office in disgrace. He had been ruined utterly, cast out of the court he had climbed, his name struck from the rolls. And within the year he was dead, some said of an apoplexy, some said by his own hand. The record did not say which, only that Edmund Voss died broken and disgraced, and that his widow Saralind took back her craft and her maiden father's trade and in time rose on her own genius to become the honored glasswright of the very court that had destroyed her husband. I sat back in the cold archive with the ledger open in front of me, and I felt the floor of the whole affair shift under me, because there at last was a reason, but it was the wrong reason, or a reason with a wound in the wrong place. For here is what stopped me cold. The judge who had first cleared the mine owners, the corrupt verdict, the bought inquiry, all of that was Edmund Voss's own doing, his own sin. It was not done to him, it was done by him. The court had not wronged Saralind's husband. Her husband had wronged 40 dead men, and the court had, in the end, punished him for it. If Saralind of Voss hated anyone, by any justice I could reckon, she should have hated the memory of her own husband. Unless she did not believe it. That was the thread, and I pulled it, and it unraveled the whole thing. I went back into the record of the second inquiry, the one that had condemned Edmund Voss, and I read who had brought the new evidence, who had reopened the case, who had insisted, against the weight of the whole comfortable court, that 40 dead miners deserved the truth however late it came. And the name at the head of that inquiry, the young royal who had refused to let the matter rest, who had signed the order that reopened it and pursued it to its bitter end, was a princess of 22 named Saralind of Harrowgate. Our queen, 20 years younger, not yet crowned but already herself, already the woman who would carry a cup of broth up 3 flights of stairs to a dying porter, already the one who could not let a wrong lie quiet for the sake of a smooth court. She had reopened the mine inquiry. She had found the bought verdict. She had, by every record in front of me, done exactly right, and 40 widows had at last been paid, and a corrupt judge had at last been named, and that judge was Saralind of Voss's husband, and he had died of it, and Saralind of Voss had spent 20 years since blowing beautiful glass for the throne of the woman who, in her heart, had killed him. I understood it then, all at once, the way you understand a thing that has been in front of you the whole time. Saralind did not believe her husband guilty. Of course she did not. What loving wife believes it when the ruin comes? She had built, over 20 years, a private world in which Edmund was innocent, and Saralind was the ambitious young princess who had made her name by destroying a good man for a scandal that sold well. A world in which the good queen the whole kingdom loved was, secretly, the murderer of Saralind's happiness. 20 years of smiling and cutting crystal and distilling scent for that woman, 20 years of being called friend, and all the while the wound had not closed but deepened, the way a wound does when it is never allowed the air of the truth. She had all the means in her clever hands, and now, at last, I had the reason. I took it to Thorn that evening in the yew walk, breathless, sure I had solved it. And Emric Thorn listened to the whole of it in his still grave way, and when I had finished he did not look triumphant. He looked, if anything, more troubled than before. "That is the reason," he agreed quietly. "That is a wound deep enough to do murder over, God forgive her. You have found the hand." He turned his bearskin slowly in his gloved hands. "But you have not answered the herald. You have not answered Lord Ashby's face when the flaw came up gone. Saralind of Eldermoor did not carry that cup to the Queen and will not carry it at the investiture. The master of the ceremony carries the cup. His hand set it in her grasp. Saralind may cut the crystal and paint the rim in her orangery for a month, but somebody inside the ceremony must make the swap, must take the true cup out of its guarded case and put the false one in the last hour before the Queen drinks. And the only man in this whole palace with the keys to the regalia room and the right to handle that cup in the herald's trust to do it unwatched is Lord Ashby," I said, and the cold came back tenfold. "Is Lord Ashby," said Thorn. "So we have two hands, Mistress Callowe, and one wound between them, and I do not yet see how the wound reaches the herald. Saralind of Eldermoor hates the Queen for a dead husband. What in God's name does the master of the ceremony have to do with a mine that fell in 20 years ago? Why would a man at the very summit of his honor, the herald of the realm, the keeper of the regalia, a man with everything to lose and nothing on earth to gain, put his hand to the killing of the Queen he has served for 20 years? He set his bearskin on his head. 4 days left, he said. We have the how and we have half the why. Find me the other half, and I will have something at last that is not a story about a scratch. The other half was harder to find, because it had been hidden on purpose, and by a cleverer hand than a grieving widow's. It took me 2 more days, the 6th and the 7th of our 9, and in the end it was not the archive that gave it to me, but the archive combined with a thing Thorn found. And the two halves fitting together made a picture so much uglier than I had feared that I sat down on the cold stone floor of the record room and could not get up for a while. I had gone back to the mine inquiry, the first one, the corrupt one, the one Edmund Voss had presided over, because I wanted to understand exactly how the false verdict had been built and who had built it. A judge does not gather his own evidence. A judge has clerks and secretaries and men who bring him the papers, and a bought verdict is not the work of one man but of a small, quiet machine. And when I read the roll of that machine, the clerks and officers of Judge Voss's bench in the year of the mine, I found, low on the list, in a hand that meant nothing to me at first, the name of the young man who had served as the judge's private secretary, Corvin Ashby. Our herald, 20 years younger, a clerk of no fortune, secretary to the brilliant Judge Voss. I read it and read it again, and the room went very quiet around me. It was Thorn who brought the rest, that same night, out of a place I could not go, the herald's own strongbox in the regalia room, which a master of the ceremony keeps for the household's oldest papers, and which a sergeant of the guard may witness the opening of when the seals are checked before a great ceremony. Thorn had witnessed that opening 2 days before, and being the man he is, he had read every seal and every docket while the clerks fussed, and one docket had caught in his memory like a burr because it did not belong. An old private letter, 20 years old, kept where no household paper had any right to be kept, sealed with a seal Thorn did not know. He described it to me, the seal a hand holding a sprig of some plant, and I knew it at once, because I had seen it 100 times pressed into the wax of the little bottles I bought from the orangery. It was the seal of Saralind of Eldermoor. We did not have to open the letter to know, in the end, what it must say. We had all the pieces, and they could fall only one way. Corvin Ashby had been Edmund Voss's secretary in the year of the corrupt verdict. Ashby had been the hand that carried the papers, that arranged the quiet things, that did the actual work of hiding what the mine's owners paid to have hidden. And when the second inquiry came, the young Princess Saralind's inquiry, and the machine began to come apart, someone had to be the man the blame settled on. And it had settled on the judge. On Edmund Voss, who was old and proud and would not name his own servants, and who took the whole weight of it to his grave, while his clever young secretary, whose actual hands had done the hidden work, slipped free of the wreck and went on and rose over 20 careful years to become the honored master of the ceremony of the very court that had ruined his master. Saralind knew. That was the letter in the strongbox. That was the seal. Somewhere in her long grief the widow had learned, or had always known, the truth her husband died protecting. That the man truly guilty of the bought verdict, the man whose hidden work had killed those 40 miners twice over, was not her Edmund at all, but Edmund's smiling secretary, who had let an old man die in his place and had prospered on it. And she had done the thing a clever, patient, ruined woman does with such a truth. She had not used it to clear her husband's name. That would have cost her the only comfort she had left, the belief that Edmund was wholly innocent and Saralind wholly to blame. She had used it instead as a chain. She held it over Corvin Ashby's polished head, that letter, that proof, for years perhaps, and she had waited. And when at last her long hate for the Queen had ripened into the thing she meant to do, she had reached out and closed the chain and made the herald her hand. That was the other half. Saralind of Voss had the wound and the skill. She cut the crystal, she painted the rim, she wanted the Queen dead. But she could not reach the cup. Only the herald could reach the cup. And the herald did not want the Queen dead at all. The herald wanted only to keep his stolen life, his honor, his place, the 20 comfortable years he had built on a dead man's disgrace. Saralind had not needed to make him a murderer. She had only needed to make him afraid. Do this one thing, the letter behind the letter said, make the swap, set the false cup in her hand, or I lay the truth before the Queen and the court and the whole kingdom, and you die as my Edmund died, disgraced and cast out, and everyone learns at last what you truly are. I understood then the face I would see on the terrace 2 days later, the drowning grief of a man watching the floor of his life give way. Lord Ashby had not been a murderer at heart. He had been a coward at heart, which in the end had cost him just as dear. A man who had done one wicked thing as a young clerk and spent 20 years fleeing it, only to have it reach out at last and make him do a far more wicked thing to keep the first one hidden. So there it is, said Thorn, when I laid the whole of it before him in the yew walk on the evening of the 7th day, both halves joined at last, the widow and the coward and the wound between them. He was quiet a long moment. God help them both. There was a better door out of this for each of them, and neither one took it. He looked toward the orangery, warm and glowing in the dusk, and toward the state apartments where a queen who had done nothing but right went about her evening not knowing that 2 people she called friend had built her a death out of an old sin. 2 days, he said. We know everything now, everything but the one thing that matters. Which is? How to prove a word of it, said Emmerich Thorn, before she raises that cup. You will think, as I thought, that it was simple now. We knew the poisoner and the hand and the reason and the plan. Surely, you say, you go to the Queen. You go to the captain of the guard. You go to anyone with power and you lay it all before them and the thing is stopped. We tried. That is the part of it I have never told anyone, and it is the part that still wakes me at night, because we did the sensible thing, the thing you are shouting at us to do, and it very nearly got us both destroyed and the Queen killed a day early besides. It was Thorn who insisted we try Captain Haveth first, though he had no love for the man because it was proper, and Emmerich Thorn was a man who did things properly even when they cost him. So on the morning of the 8th day, the day before the investiture, we went together to the captain's office in the guardhouse, and we laid it out, carefully, in order, the missing chip and the false cup and the smell in the orangery, and the archive and the strongbox and the whole terrible shape of it. And Captain Haveth listened with his narrow face growing colder by the minute, and when we had done he sat back and looked at Sergeant Thorn for a long, long time, and then he said, "Let me be certain I have understood you, Sergeant. Your whole case rests upon a scratch in a cup that you alone remember, that no other living soul can confirm, and that you say is now gone." He let that sit. "You have no false cup. You have searched and you cannot find it. You have no true cup. You have a smell that the apothecary here caught and lost in a room full of 100 cents. You have an old scandal that was closed 20 years ago by the Crown itself. And you have a letter in a strongbox that you have not read, cannot lawfully open, and can only guess at the contents of." He stood. "Do you know what you are asking me to do on the strength of that? You are asking me to arrest the master of the ceremony of the realm, the herald of the king's guard's own ceremonies, and the most honored craftswoman in the kingdom, both of them the queen's personal friends, on the eve of a state investiture broadcast to the whole nation, for a murder that has not happened, on the evidence of a scratch that no one but you has ever seen. If you are wrong, Sergeant Thorn, if that cup is only a cup, you will have shamed the crown before 10 million people, ruined 2 innocent and beloved servants, and ended your own 30 years in the same hour. And I will have ended mine beside you for listening to you." "And if I am right," said Thorn very quietly. "You are not right," said Haveth, and I heard in his voice the thing that is the real enemy in every one of these stories, not malice, but the vast comfortable weight of a court that does not want its afternoon disturbed. Men who stand a post too long begin to see things. It happens. There is no shame in it. I will send you to the surgeon, and I will say nothing to anyone, and tomorrow you will stand your post and the queen will drink and nothing will happen, and in a week you will thank me. That is the kindest thing I can do for you, Sergeant, and I am doing it." Dismissed. We walked out into the gray courtyard, and I remember Thorn's face, and it frightened me more than anything had yet because it was perfectly calm. A stubborn man would have raged. Thorn only said, "Well, that door is shut," and then worse. And now Haveth will speak of it, not to accuse us to be kind as he thinks. He will mention to the Chamberlain that poor old Thorn is seeing ghosts and had best be watched on the day. And the Chamberlain will mention it to the herald because they are thick as thieves, those two. And by tonight, Mistress Callowe, Lord Ashby, will know that a guardsman has been asking about the Founder's cup. I felt the ground go out from under me. "Then we've warned them." "We have warned them," said Thorn. "And they moved. That was the false dawn of the whole affair. The moment we thought we had lost, and had, and then found the loss was not the end but the trap tightening. Because that very afternoon, while I sat sick with fear in the dispensary, Thorn on his rounds saw the thing he had most dreaded. He saw Lord Ashby go into the regalia room with 2 of the household clerks, and he saw the great velvet case brought out and opened for a final inspection, and he saw, from the doorway, where a guardsman may stand and watch, the herald lift out the Founder's cup and turn it in his hands and pronounce its sound, and set it back in its case, and seal the case with his own seal for the morning. And Thorn, watching, understood 2 things at once, and they were both terrible. The first was that the swap had already been made. The cup Ashby sealed into that case was the false one. The true one was gone, hidden, perhaps already destroyed. There would be no swap in the last hour to be caught in the act. No moment on the day when a sharp eye might see one cup exchanged for another. It was done, already, sealed away behind the herald's own wax, and it would come out tomorrow flawless and poisoned, and no hand would touch it between now and the Queen's lips but hers. And the second thing Thorn understood, watching Ashby's gray shaking hand seal that case, was that the herald knew he was being watched, and had done it anyway, and had wept a little while he did it. Thorn swore to me the man's eyes were wet as he pressed the seal, because he was more afraid of Saralind of Eldermoor's letter than he was of murder, and there was no longer any part of him that believed he could stop. "So it comes down to the day," Thorn said to me that last night in the dispensary by the light of one lamp. "There is no proof I can lay before anyone that they will hear in time. The case is sealed. The true cup is gone. Haveth has stopped his ears. If I break that seal without authority, I am finished before I begin and the ceremony goes on without me. And if I do nothing, he stopped. If you do nothing, she drinks, I said. If I do nothing, she drinks. He turned his bearskin in his hands, the old habit, and for the first time in all our 9 days, I saw Emric Thorne look tired to the bone. There is only one place left where I can stop it, Mistress Callowe, not before the cup is raised. I cannot reach it before. Only after, in the last half-second between the raising and the drinking, when the cup is already at her lips, and it is far too late for anyone to argue me out of it. I will have to let it come all the way to the edge and trust my own eyes one last time and move. He set the bearskin down. And if I have counted a single thing wrong, if that cup is sound after all, if the chip was only ever in my own tired head, then I will strike the Founder's cup from the hand of the Queen of Eldermoor in front of the whole world, for nothing, and everything I have been for 30 years ends on the stone with the crystal. I did not know what to say to him. There was nothing to say. Outside the high window the palace was going dark for the last night, and somewhere above us a good queen was sleeping, who did not know that everything now hung on one aging guardsman's willingness to bet his whole life, in front of 10 million eyes, on a scratch. "How will you know?" I whispered. "On the day, in the half-second, how will you be sure?" And Emric Thorne looked at me, and he said the thing I have carried in my heart ever since. "I won't be sure," he said. "Certainty is a thing you get afterward, Mistress Callowe, if you get it at all. In the moment there is only what your eyes have told you for 30 years, and whether you will stand behind it when standing behind it costs you everything. That is the whole of the guard, not the standing still. Any statue can stand still. It is the moving at the one right instant on nothing but what you know and being willing to be destroyed if you are wrong." He rose and put on his bearskin. "Be on the terrace tomorrow," he said, "at the back where you always stand. Whatever happens, be where I can find you after. If I am wrong, I will want a friendly face when they take me. And if I am right," the ghost of something crossed his grave face, "someone will have to tell them how it was done. They will not take it from me. But they might take it from the woman who keeps the Queen's medicines." Then he was gone, and I did not sleep at all that night, and the next morning was the morning of the investiture, and the sun came up gold and merciless over the Whitethorn Terrace, as though the whole bright world could not wait to watch a man gamble everything he was. I have already told you the shape of what happened on the terrace. Now let me tell you the inside of it, the way I watched it come, second by second, with the whole of what I knew burning in me and no way in the world to stop the thing from rolling to its edge. The Whitethorn Terrace was at its most beautiful that afternoon, which is the cruelty of such days. The worst things always come dressed in the finest weather. The lime trees were in their first leaf. The roses along the balustrade were opening. The fountain threw its bright ropes of water into the gold light. And 400 of the greatest people in the kingdom stood in their silks and their orders while the little orchestra played, and the new knights of the Whitethorn knelt one by one to receive the accolade. I stood at the back, by the terrace wall, in my plain gray, with my hands knotted in my apron and my heart going so hard I thought the woman beside me must hear it. I could see all of them. That was the terrible gift of my place at the back. I could see Queen Saralind at the center in her ivory gown, gracious and unhurried, laying the flat of the old sword on shoulder after kneeling shoulder. I could see Prince Consort Aldrich to her left, and the 2 royal children in their places of honor, Princess Malin at 8, small and gray-eyed and watchful, and Prince Joran at 10, fidgeting in his fine collar, kicking his heel against the chair leg until his father's hand found his knee. I could see, 2 paces behind the Queen's right shoulder, red and black and utterly still, Sergeant Emric Thorne, whose eyes I could not read from where I stood, but whose stillness I understood now as the most terrible effort of a man's life, the standing still while everything in him screamed to move too soon. And I could see Lord Corvin Ashby. The herald stood in his golden chain at the head of the ceremony, tall and silver and grave, and he did his office perfectly, and only I perhaps of all that gleaming crowd could see what it was costing him. His face was the color of tallow. There was a sheen on his brow that the mild day did not account for. And when at last the final night had risen and the moment came, the sealing of the investiture, the raising of the Founder's Cup, I saw Lord Ashby turn to the velvet case, and I saw his hands, and his hands were shaking so that the clerk beside him glanced at them. He broke his own seal. He lifted the Founder's Cup from its bed of velvet, 400 years of crystal, flawless, catching the sun in 100 bright fractures. And it was so beautiful that a soft sound went up from the crowd, an awe of pure delight, and I wanted to scream. A steward came forward with the wine and filled it, red as garnets, to the brim. And the Queen's own taster stepped up, a solemn young man in the household livery, and he took the cup and turned it and wet his lips at the near rim, exactly as Thorn had said, the taster's rim, the safe one, and he waited the 10 slow heartbeats of the office, and he found nothing because there was nothing there to find, and he bowed and handed the cup to Lord Ashby, and Lord Ashby, with his shaking tallow hands, carried the Founder's Cup of Eldermoor the 3 steps to his Queen, and set it in her grasp. I watched her take it. I watched her turn, out of 30 years of habit that every one of us shares, the far arc of the rim toward her own lips, the fair side, the untouched side, the side no taster ever wets, and lift it. And I saw the sun come down the terrace and strike the crystal and light the wine to fire, and I saw the Queen of Eldermoor part her lips to drink. And I saw Emric Thorne's eyes move. I was watching for it, and still I nearly missed it. It was so small, his gaze dropping from its middle distance forever forward to the rim of the cup, and holding there one instant, and I would swear to my last day that I saw the exact moment the thing he had waited 9 days for came into his sight. Because as the Queen tilted the cup and the light ran along the far rim, something on that rim caught the sun that crystal alone does not catch, a thin band of oily brightness, an iridescence, a film where the light went rainbow instead of clean, the way oil goes rainbow on water. A ghost of a sheen along the one arc of the rim that no taster had touched. It was there for perhaps half a heartbeat, as the angle of the cup and the angle of the sun crossed just so, and it was gone as she brought it higher. And in that half a heartbeat, Emric Thorne broke 30 years of stillness and came out of his post like the sea coming over a wall and struck the cup from her hand. You know the rest of that instant, the scream of the crystal, the wine flung up her ivory gown. The 400 held breaths, the Chamberlain's crack of "seize him," and then the Queen, not flinching, turning her head, looking into the face of the man who had struck the cup from her hand and deciding in 2 seconds to trust a lifetime of his stillness over the evidence of her own shocked eyes. "Hold! No one touches my guardsman until I have heard him. Tell me why you struck the cup from my hand." And Thorne, rough and steady, "Because it was poisoned, Majesty. And I can prove it before you finish drawing breath to doubt me. Now let me tell you how he proved it. Because that was the thing that turned the whole terrace from a horror into a reckoning." The Queen had asked how he could know, and Emric Thorne did not answer with the 9 days. He was too wise for that. The 9 days were a story, and Haveth had already taught us what the court does with a story. He answered with a thing the court could see with its own eyes there, on the stone, in the sun. "Majesty," he said, "look at the pieces of the cup, not all of them. The rim, the far rim, the piece nearest your own feet." He did not move to touch it. A guardsman under suspicion does not stoop to the evidence and handle it. There is a film upon it. You will see it catch the light as the whole cup caught it, a brightness that is not in the crystal. Have it lifted not by a bare hand, by God. Let no one touch it with a bare hand, and have Mistress Callowe of the dispensary brought forward, who stands at the back of this terrace, and let her tell you before all these people what a poison looks like that has been painted on a rim and dried invisible and lit by the sun. She will know it. It is her whole trade to know it. And when she has told you, send to the orangery and to the regalia room, and you will find the rest. And the Queen, I will love her for this until I die, The queen did not hesitate, and did not look to the chamberlain, and did not defer the terrible thing for the comfort of the crowd. She looked at the shards at her feet, and she said in that voice that carried without rising, "Fetch me the apothecary." And a household guard came the length of the terrace and took my arm, and 400 faces turned from Emric Thorn to me, and I walked up that terrace on legs of water into the great open space around the shattered cup, into the presence of my queen, with the whole kingdom watching, to say the truest and most frightening words of my life. I will not set down here the name of the thing that was on the rim. There are things a keeper of the physic does not say aloud in a crowd, and I did not say it then. But I knelt by the shards where Thorn had told me the far rim lay, and I did not touch it, and I bent close, and I looked at the thin, oily brightness along the crystal, and I brought my face near enough to catch what my nose had lost once already in a room full of flowers. And this time the wind was still and the flowers were behind me. And it was there, unmistakable, almond and the green bitterness beneath the almond, the smell I keep under 3 locks and count to the ounce. I stood up. My voice, when it came, surprised me by being steady. "Majesty," I said, "there is a poison painted on this rim. It has been dissolved in a spirit of wine and laid on thin and dried, so that it shows no color and holds no scent until wine and a warm mouth wake it. It is on the far arc only, the side a taster never wets and a lady always turns to her own lips. It is one of the deadliest preparations known to my craft, and it is kept in my own dispensary under lock, and I account for every grain of it, and none of mine is missing. I made myself say the last of it, though it damned a woman I had liked. But I am not the only person in this palace who can make it. It can be distilled by anyone with the art of catching the invisible and making it hold, by a perfumer, by a maker of scents. The terrace was so silent I could hear the fountain. Sergeant Thorn did not strike a cup of wine from your hand, Majesty. He struck away your death. I would stake my life and my craft upon it here before all of you." I heard the sound the crowd made. It is a sound I hope never to hear again. 400 people understanding all at once that they had come to watch an honor and had nearly watched a murder, and had, every one of them, been ready to see an innocent man destroyed for preventing it. Queen Saralind stood very still. She looked at the shards, and at me, and then she lifted her eyes and turned them slowly, the whole length of the terrace, to Lord Corvin Ashby. And Lord Ashby broke. He did not confess, not at first. He did a smaller and more human thing. He began to weep, standing there in his golden chain before the whole assembled kingdom, this grave and polished man, the tears just running down his tallow face while his mouth worked and no sound came. And then he sank down. Not thrown down, not seized, he simply folded, as a man folds when the thing he has been holding up for 20 years is finally too heavy, and he knelt on the flagstones among the wine and the broken crystal with his chain dragging in the red, and he said, in a voice I barely heard, "I couldn't," she said she would tell them. She said she would tell them what I, and then he could not go on. "Tell them what?" said the queen, not cruel, terribly gentle. "Whatever it is, Corvin, it cannot be worse than this." "It was always worse than this," he said, to me. "That was the whole of it, Majesty, that was my sin. I was more afraid of my own name than of your life." And then, kneeling in the wine, he told it, the mine, the bought verdict, the papers he had carried as a young clerk, the old judge who had gone to his grave rather than name his own servant, and the widow who had learned the truth and kept it 20 years like a blade, and had drawn it at last and set its edge against his throat. "Make the swap, or I lay you bare." He had believed, God help him, that there was no way out. He had never once thought, until it was too late, until the cup was in her hand, that a man might simply choose the ruin of his name over the murder of his queen, and be, in the ruin, cleaner than he had been in 20 years of safety. "There was a door," said the queen, and I remembered Thorn saying the same thing in the yew walk, the very same words, and the skin rose on my arms. "There was a door out of this the whole time, Corvin. It was only ever 3 words long. It was I did it. You could have come to me 20 years ago or 20 days ago or this morning and said them, and I would have broken you, yes, but I would not have hated you. And 40 widows might have had the truth, and my husband's cup would be whole, and you would not be kneeling in it now. She turned to the guards. Take him, gently. He is a coward and a murderer twice over, and I am sorrier for him than I have words to say. They took Lord Ashby away, and he went without a struggle, an old man weeping in a golden chain, and I have never in my life seen anything so much like a soul being let out of a cage it had built for itself. And then the Queen sent to the orangery. Saralind of Eldermoor did not weep, and she did not fold, and she did not run. When the guardsmen came to the glowing workshop at the foot of the west garden, they found her sitting quite calmly at her far bench among the drying flowers and the racks of scent, her clever pale hands folded in her lap, waiting, as though she had known from the moment the cup screamed on the terrace that it was over. She had. She rose when they came, and she asked only to be allowed to put out the fire under her furnace so the orangery would not burn, and they let her, and she banked the coals with her own steady hands as though it were any evening of her long life, and then she held out her wrists. They did not need to be bound. She walked up through the west garden between the two guardsmen with her head high, and when they brought her onto the terrace where the wine was still bright on the stone, and the Queen still stood among the shards of the 400-year-old cup, Saralind of Eldermoor looked at Saralind for a long, long moment, friend to friend, murderer to intended, across 20 years of smiling lies, and the whole kingdom held its breath to hear what such a woman would say. She said, "You truly never knew, did you? All these years, you never knew what you took from me." "I knew I reopened the mine," the Queen said quietly. "I knew a judge was found corrupt and died of it. I did not know you believed I killed an innocent man. I did not know, Saralind, or I would have gone to you on my knees 20 years ago with the truth, that your Edmund was not innocent and was not, in the end, the guiltiest either. It was never me who took Edmund from you. It was the man kneeling in irons in my guardhouse this hour, who let your husband die in his place, and let you believe a lie for 20 years so that he might keep his golden chain. Your hate had the right house and the wrong door, Saralind. You have poisoned my cup to avenge a man who was betrayed by the very letter you used to make Ashby your hand. You knew Ashby was guilty. You held it over him, and in 20 years of holding it, it never once occurred to you to wonder whether the guilt you were using was the guilt that should have cleared your Edmund and mine from any part in his death. I watched that land on Saralind of Eldermoor. I watched the one thing her long grief had never allowed, the possibility that she had spent 20 years hating the wrong person for the wrong reason, and had, in the end, killed no one and ruined no one but herself and a coward, while the good woman she had built into a monster in her heart had, 20 years ago, been the only soul in the whole affair to fight for the truth of her husband at all. Her clever face did not crumple. It went instead very still and very old, the way a house goes still when the last light is put out in it, and she said nothing more at all, and they led her away. They found the true cup that same evening. It was in the orangery all along, which was the last small cruelty of the thing. Saralind of Eldermoor had not destroyed the founder's cup of Eldermoor. She could not bring herself to, a maker to the last, unable to break 400 years of another's mastery even to hide her own crime. She had wrapped it in silk and set it inside a hollow mold on the highest shelf of her workshop, meaning, I think, to break it later or never, and the household clerks brought it down that night unharmed. And there, near the foot, on the side that faces the drinker's body when the cup is raised, was the little star of white no bigger than a grain of barley that had been there for 400 years, and that one aging guardsman, alone in all the world, had noticed was gone. The Queen sent for Whitethorn the next morning. Not to the guardhouse, to her own private cabinet, the small warm room where she does the true work of the realm, and she sent for me as well. And for once in 9 years I stood in that room not as a keeper of pills, but as a person the Queen of Eldermoor wished to thank. She had the true cup on the table between us, the real one with its flaw catching the morning light, and she looked at Thorn for a long while, the way she had looked at him on the terrace, and then she said, "They tell me you knew for 9 days, Sergeant. That you carried this alone and came to me only at the last, at the very edge, because there was no other way I would have believed you in time. They tell me Captain Haveth sent you to the surgeon." "He did his duty as he saw it, Majesty," said Thorn. "So did I." "You struck the cup of the realm from my hand in front of the whole kingdom," the Queen said, "on nothing but a flaw you alone remembered, knowing that if you were wrong it would end you. Do you know, Sergeant Thorn, how rare a thing that is? Not the eye. The eye is a gift. I honor it, but a man cannot help what he can see. The rare thing is the moving. 10,000 men might have seen that film on the rim and doubted their own eyes and said nothing, because saying something was ruin and staying still was safe, and no one would ever have known they saw. You saw, and you doubted, and you moved anyway. That is not discipline, Sergeant. Discipline is the standing still. Any statue can stand still." She smiled very slightly at the echo of his own words, though she could not have known he had said them to me. "What you have is the thing discipline is for. The willingness to break it once in a life at the one right instant, and to pay whatever it costs to be right." She did not offer him a medal. She knew him too well. A medal would have shamed a man like Thorn, who did not do it for a medal and would not have his own worth pinned to his chest. What she gave him instead was a thing I have never heard of a sovereign giving before or since. She gave him a standing order written in her own hand, and read aloud that afternoon to the whole assembled guard so that no captain could ever again wave it away. That Sergeant Emric Thorn, and any guardsman who came after him in that post, was empowered, at his own sole judgment, and on no authority but his own eyes, to act to protect the person of the sovereign without waiting for leave, and that no man of the guard would ever again be broken for moving too soon in the Queen's defense. Haveth read it out with his narrow face carefully blank. Thorn received it with a single bow. And me, the Queen took my hand in both of hers, the same hands that had raised the cup, and she said only, "You gave him your eyes and your keys and your silence for 9 days, Wren Callowe, when the safe thing was to let the great machine grind on without you. I know what that cost. I know you liked her. Thank you for choosing me over your comfort. Very few do." Then she let us go, and we walked out together into the ordinary morning, the guardsman and the apothecary, past the terrace where the servants were still scrubbing the last of the wine from between the flagstones, and neither of us said very much, because there was not very much left to say. Lord Ashby was tried and stripped and cast out, as he had feared for 20 years he would be. But in the end it was his own 3 words that undid him. "I did it," spoken at last on his knees in the wine, 20 years too late to save anyone, though I have wondered since whether saying them even that late let some small light back into the man before the dark closed over him. Saralind of Eldermoor was tried too, and the full truth of the old mine was reopened one last time, and the 40 widows' children, grown now, learned at last the whole shape of what had been done to their fathers, that a judge had been bought, that his clerk had done the buying, and that a young princess long ago had cared enough to drag it into the light. The kingdom, which had thought it knew the story, found that it had never known the half of it, and that the half it had not known was the better half, and it was about the Queen. As for Emric Thorn, he went back to his post. That is the part I want you to hold on to, of all of it, not the terrace, not the trial, not the golden chain dragging in the wine. 3 days after he struck the cup from the Queen's hand in front of 10 million eyes, after the whole kingdom had spoken his name, and the court had wept and marveled over him, Sergeant Emric Thorn put on his red tunic and his tall bearskin and his white gloves, and he took up his rifle, and he walked out to the mark 2 paces behind the Queen's right shoulder, and he became again a red and black statue that happened to breathe. Nothing in his face had changed. He stood the long hours exactly as he had stood them for 30 years, eyes forward, still as stone, filling the empty silence of the post with the endless quiet watching that no medal will ever name. I asked him once near the end of my own years at the palace, whether he ever thought about how close it had come, how nearly he had said nothing, doubted his eyes, let the safe stillness win. And Emric Thorne looked out over the Whitethorn Terrace, where the roses had grown back thick along the balustrade, and a new cup, a plain, honest one, waited in its case for the next great day, and he said the last true thing I ever heard him say. "Every day," he said, "that is what the stillness is, Mistress Callowe, not emptiness. It is a man standing very quiet every hour of every day, getting ready for the half-second that may never come, and being willing, when it comes, to give up everything he is on, nothing but what he knows. Most of us stand our whole lives and the half-second never comes, and we are glad. Mine came." He settled the bearskin, the old habit, and turned back to his post. "I only had to be right once, so I made sure for 30 years that I would be." And then he was still again, and the Queen came out into the gold light to begin her day, and passed within a pace of the man who had saved her life without once looking at him, because that is how it is meant to be, and he did not look at her either, eyes forward, unmoving, a piece of the palace that happened to breathe. But I saw it. I always saw the small things. It is my whole trade, as noticing was his. As the Queen passed him, her hand moved just once, very slightly, brushing the air near his sleeve, not touching. A sovereign does not touch her guard on post, but near enough that he would feel the small warmth of it pass. And Sergeant Emric Thorne, who had not moved without an order in 30 years, did not move now either. He only, so slightly that no one in the whole world but a woman at the back who spent her life watching for such things would ever have caught it, closed his eyes for the length of one held breath, and opened them again, and stood his post.